Cool. Thank you very much. In which case, I'd like to invite the first affirmative speaker to open up the debate within 8 minutes. Here.
Wait a minute. Is this clear?
Yep.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you very much. People die every day, suffering, and even cannot fulfill their basic necessities, and they are hunger and they suffering in their life condition. We said there is no difference with any kind of the crimes against humanity that already exist in the past, ladies and gentlemen. And this is how the current pandemic conditions, as the failure of the governments, is constituted as also a crime against the humanity in the very first place, ladies and gentlemen. So how we define the failure in the from begin with? The failure that we meant under the government side of the house is the moment there is a constantly regression upon the corona condition in a certain country, which is also because of the bad policy reinforcement. For example, like in Indonesia, for example, like they are very late to handle in the very beginning of the period of the corona, for example. And lastly, with the mechanism to constitute it as a crime against the humanity, there will be a neutral expert, for example, like ICC and so on and so forth, will to assess the parameter to ensure this kind of the country is really a crime against humanity from begin with. So what does it mean? What does we mean about the human crisis from begin with? The moment first, it is possible, for example, in the remove to the moment the implication would be, for example, it is possible to remove the position of the governments, and also it is possible for even imprisonments for the human crisis in itself for the governments that already handle a certain country, ladies and gentlemen. This is the model that we stand for under the government side of the house. Two things that I would like to explain. Number one is about justification, number two about the implication. So going to the first one about why it is justified to consider as a crime against the humanity in general. So what is the parameter of the crime against the humanity? There are two parameters. Something constitute as the crime against a humanity. First, the moment it's widely spread, and second, the moment it is very systemic in the very beginning in the root, ladies and gentlemen. So going to the first one, the first parameter about the widespread, ladies and gentlemen. Knowing on how the failure of handling the pandemic is really that wide and very sufferings. It makes people massively suffer in living in the under suffer condition, and even every day a lot of people die, ladies and gentlemen. Especially when we're talking about a vulnerable people, especially for poor people, because they are poor. At the end of the day, they cannot access, for example, like the healthcare and so on and so forth, and it makes them die every day, and it is indirectly you kill him indirectly, ladies and gentlemen, for this kind of the people. For example, like black people in the United States of America who cannot access the healthcare facility from very begin with because it is very expensive, and what's happened is they are die every day, ladies and gentlemen. On how it takes, for example, on how, take a look on how the economic impact and perspective. Take a look on how, because the global impact of the economic at the end of the economic impact in the current in a certain country, and make even hard for a lot of people to fulfill their basic necessities, and even hard for people to have a food. It is something, for example, at the end of the day, people die. So that is why it is indirectly you are saying with you kill this kind of the people at the end of the day. So why this is the case? Because the parameters at the end of the day, when you kill a certain group massively, and we say the pandemic fulfilled those kind of the parameters from begin with, because you let the vulnerable people and the poor people to let them die at the end of the day. That is why it has fulfilled the parameter, because of you kill a certain group massively, ladies and gentlemen, in a crime against humanity from begin with. So second, the parameters. I'm going to talk to you about the systemic parameters. I'm going to talk about systemic parameter. Let's notice on how this is fully caused because of the governments and not external factors at all, ladies and gentlemen, because the governments is the ones who have authority and a lot of facility in the very first place. For example, in here we're talking about like a regulation making, but they fail to make it as fast as possible or as appropriate as possible to handle the corona from begin with, to prevent it in the very first place. And why it is fulfilled the parameter? Because the parallel example of this is when you have a job, for example, in your office, and you take that, you are constantly take that, but you fail to finish it properly. It means you will seen as a complicit failure, and at the end of the day. So that is why it is same with the governments. They are already swear that they want to take care a nation, no matter what the condition is, but fail. So at the end of the day, that's why it is also the crimes of against the humanity from begin with. But moreover, more likely, taking care because of this is caused because of the political interest of the certain government. For example, like in Indonesia, that's in the beginning of the pandemic period, but the president of Indonesia is only say the narrative, oh, we are okay, no worry, and so on and so forth. And it's make the worsened condition like right now because of this kind of the presidents of Indonesia want to maintain their political power, their political image. So that is why this kind of the mishandling of the coronavirus and make the worst condition right now. Or for example, take a look at the study case of the United States. For example, like the Donald Trump is only blaming China without any tangible benefit, tangible policy, and give the benefit towards the whole of the people and make the worsened condition for the United States of America. And gentlemen, shows to you with the study case is the government is complicitly for this kind of the massive people who die, and that is why it is crime against humanity. But then the opposition may say, oh no, this is external factor because they are not capable and they don't have any resources and so on and so forth. We don't say like that, ladies and gentlemen, because notice on how, take the example of Vietnam, Thailand, and so on and so forth. Vietnam, Thailand is even poorer in compare with Indonesia or maybe United States. But take a look on how Vietnam and Thailand can maintain the pandemic itself, and they have a more stable situation in comparatively with the richer countries like Indonesia or United States, ladies and gentlemen. It shows to you that the external factors of capability or maybe resources is not matter at all, because this kind of country shows that they can handle it at the end of the day. That is why it is complicitly for the governments to kill indirectly for this kind of the people that constantly. That is why it is a human crime, the crime against humanity, and that's why it is justified for us to call that, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, I will talking to you about the implications of we constitute this kind of country as a crimes against humanity, because you have to notice that with the crimes of against humanity, it will be a catalyst at the end of the day, because we think the betterment will be accessed because of the catalyst for the betterment of the governments at the end of the day, and German, because based on the study case that I've explained to you, like in Indonesia, like in the United States, that root of problem commonly because of the politicization that they want to maintain the power and so on and so forth. But the moment we have the scenario of this, it will be a very shameful for this kind of the politicians at the end of the day, and that is why they will be prevent this kind of happen to access at the end of the day, and that is why people will be and that's why the moment same situation exists, it won't be prevented under our side of the house, because knowing on how the governments in the very beginning are the politicians who care with their own image, for example. But the moment we have this kind of the label as a crimes at the end of the day, it will make them shameful, and that's why they will might think twice to prevent it from the very beginning. So the moment there is the same situation, it will be happen at the end of the day. But more likely on how they are at the very beginning are the negligent people at the very beginning, because knowing on how that the coronavirus is already exists and already that massive, ladies and gentlemen. But what That is only, for example, like in the governments of Indonesia, which makes the open border and make a lot of the people even die even more, ladies and gentlemen, because of their policy, ladies and gentlemen. Or for example, like Donald Trump to open the economic and make people die. This is because the fault of them, and we are very proud to propose.
Thank you for that speech. I'd like to now invite the first negative speaker to open up the case for the negative bench within 8 minutes. Here.
Check, am I audible?
Could you speak perhaps a bit closer to the mic?
Check, am I audible?
Yep, that's better.
Okay, wait, I'm setting up my timer. In opposition, we're going to consider states' failure of handling this pandemic not as a crimes against humanity. We're okay to just categorize this as mere state failures, like what happened, just like how we label 2008 crisis in US. We're going to consider this as a typical failure that is not necessarily crime against humanity. We're okay with people protesting to state, we're okay with people criticizing to states, but we're not okay that it's we're not okay with labeling this as crime against humanity. So I don't think we have to discuss the past mistakes of government and how they're not ready enough to handle this pandemic, like how their previous negligent actions. I think that these are irreversible anyway, right? So I don't think in government they can change this irreversible harm. But so I think that we should discuss better on the attempts that these states had already made, and also the practical benefit of considering these failure of addressing pandemics as crime against humanity. I don't think that side government have ever give you any proof why it's going to be practically beneficial for the society if we consider states failure as a crime against humanity, and why then it's necessarily going to solve the conflict, solve the pandemic easier. So before there's several rebuttals. Firstly, talking about their parameter of crimes against humanity, I think that all of these parameters of being systemic and also massive could only fly if those systemic impact are just solely because of government. I don't think it's true. Like there are other externalities that are beyond government's ability to control. Like firstly, people refusing to wear masks in UK and US, people rallying against lockdown in Germany, US, or maybe there are businesses that refuse to close themselves. People are also refusing to test themselves because of stigma that comes to COVID-19 patients, for example. I think that regulation can only work if the target is cooperative to begin with. What government can do and capable of doing is that firstly, designing the policy, second of all, preparing the budget, and third of all, preparing all of the necessary human resources that is able to support the enactment of this policy. But the efficacy largely relies on society as a target. So I don't think it's fair for us to solely blame this on the government. But second of all, they try to bring you precedents of other countries that has successfully tackled COVID. I don't think these countries have same demographic and also government system. Like all countries have different demographic and government system, so you cannot equalize this. For example, Vietnam have harsher, a more autocratic government and less population. So of course, it's going to be easier for them to just use lockdown strategy and just combat the virus easily. But third of all, they try to claim about, oh, there's a political intention from the politicians to maintain in power. So of course, they try to be negligent on these issues. I don't think this can fly, because if these politicians are that pragmatic, if they want to maintain that, they will exactly try to their best to effectively curb the virus. And that's why in some school already exist attempts that are that try to curb this virus down, like subsidizing the testing and so on and so on, that I will prove you later on in my arguments. So first argument, why this is not categorized as crime against humanity and why this labeling is unjust. So first, I think that the first parameter of crimes against humanity is that the active criminal intention. So the things that is to say, like you actively states have actively having intention to do this. So this parameter is exclusive from, that's why ignorance cannot be the parameter. That's why negligence cannot be the parameter, because when you're talking about crimes against humanity, it is much more different than just like typical crimes. So therefore you cannot count negligence and also ignorance as a parameter to categorize certain criminal the crime against humanity as it is. So things like Holocaust or genocide, you categorize this as crimes against humanity because there's active criminal intention from the perpetrators itself. But they have the goals to eradicate certain population. That intentionally prepare all of the weapons of mass destructions and etc. to do these particular actions. I don't think states did that in the past, right? But second of all, there should be premeditated actions. Like there are stages of the killings, for example. Like in Holocaust, there are stages of oppression, like multiple stages of Jewish killings. There are firstly segregation, second of all labeling these Jews people, third of all concentration camp, and fourth of all burning these people alive. These stages prove that these people actually have like times to reconstruct the active criminal behavior, and that's why we prosecute Nazi that is actively involving, not the whole Germans who are bystanders, because the category of crimes against humanity could only be given to those who actively perpetrate and also these actions. I don't think in status quo those things exist. Like states do not do any of this. Like firstly, I think that states still try to cure this anyway. Like there are attempts like subsidizing COVID treatment, massive testing, funding vaccines. I think that states also still want to maintain their political legitimacy and their electability for the future. So of course they still want to do this anyway, right? There are also pressures from society that demand this. But second of all, I think that this pandemic is unprecedented. So it's unfair to expect states to be fully prepared to handle all of this pandemic, all of the mass and also chaos that's created by COVID. Like it's not like SARS or MERS that was endemic and also just target thousands of population. This targets billions or billions of population, and the transmission itself is very fast. But lastly, I think that this failure is affected by lots of externalities, like the lack of budget, information spreading, like this because of this virus is unprecedented. Like the research for this and also the continuity of its like evolution and like this mutation is still being calculated. There are also some rebellious society that reject safety protocol. There are also like conspiracy theories that's actively spreading. So of course, like you cannot solely blame states on this. So in conclusion, it is unjust to label the state's failure as crimes against humanity. But second argumentation, this labeling will create unnecessary condition that hampers pandemic solvency. I think that first, this creates political instability. It's likely because we're going to horrifically label states as inhuman actors. You will heavily retaliate against states to the extent you'll refuse to cooperate, because if you try to cooperate with states, you will deem yourself as the accessories of crimes against humanity. It's going to be harmful in two ways, because first, it shifts focus of policy. Second of all, there will no constructive engagement between actors, so there will not be any collaboration to solve the pandemic. I think collaboration is important because first, there's a communal issue that you need massive help. Second of all, this collaboration is important so that policy can be enacted, like for community empowerment, infrastructure or structures for new normal adaptation, social distancing measures. So in the end, when you don't have this collaboration, it's going to be harder for society on the states itself to solve this pandemic. But second of all, when you try to prosecute these states to ICC, you will create vacuum of power, right? There will be new government that you expect to replace the position of previous government. It's going to be harmful because first, the transition of new government will shift public's focus from handling the pandemic, because the talk will be about campaign, discourse will be concentrated on politics. But second of all, like during the transition, there will be personal attacks to candidates. There are also structural transition to multiple departments, because you're going to like change the previous public servants with other public servant that is not representing the previous government. But second of all, I think that lastly, I think that new government will focus on differentiating themselves with the previous government. So the new policy that they will enact will not necessarily be metaphor, just for the sake of differentiating themselves with the previous government. We're very proud.
Thank you for that speech. I'd like to now invite the second affirmative speaker to continue the case for the affirmative bench within 8 minutes. Hear, hear.
Is this audible?
Yep, loud and clear.
Hold on a moment. Okay, I'm starting now. We believe that it is important for us not to only talk about the current pandemic that is existing in the status quo. We believe that all this kind of policy that we are trying to propose today also going to be applied in the future. In the future, should there be a pandemic, on what kind of action, of course, of action that government should do, ladies and gentlemen. But even if that is not the case, we believe that taking away a lot of human life to begin with requires a lot of accountability, especially you are the only one in power that could have prevent all those kind of things, ladies and gentlemen. This is the reason why, even though there are certain countries that already fell in the past, accountability is still important anyway, because we do not want for them to only simply intolerance at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. So there are two concerns that that they brought up to this debate. First is what is considered as crime against humanity, and second, how do you create a better pandemic management? Let's talk about the first thing, right? I'm going to engage those within those kind of two clashes. What can be considered as crime against humanity? What they told us that there are external impact existing in the status quo. For example, that government do not. For example, that people are reluctant to use mask anyway, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, we believe that all this kind of thing that is claimed by their side as external factor is also considered within the power of government. What is the proof? For example, we see a lot of country in Europe. There's also applying all kinds of rules for people to use all those kinds of masks. The usage of fines or the usage of force to keep people stay in their house. This is all the something that is within something to those kind of external impact are something that we cannot control to begin with. But secondly, we're going to say that even if there is an external impact, we believe government still the one, the actor that could at least minimize the harm that is happening. Because sure, we concede that pandemic happened instantly, ladies and gentlemen. But notice that what consider crimes against humanity is when the moment you do not take a course of action as decisive as possible, ladies and gentlemen. This is, for example, the case of you are not closing your border at the end of the day. You are not closing your border at the end of the day just because you think that those kind of disease would not enter our country. These are the thing that those kind of external impact that could still be controlled by government at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, they also told us that they are going that you cannot consider this as crime against humanity because there is no active criminal intention, ladies and gentlemen. We say there is. What is the proof? First, we believe that all those kind of thing is resulted is because of your negligence and habits, ladies and gentlemen. Because all those kind of bad pandemic management to begin with is resulted because of your political interest to begin with. You are biased to those kind of thing to begin with. It's because you are being consumed by the human nature of wanting to survive alone, of your ego, ladies and gentlemen. And thirdly, it's because you are also consumed with all those kind of mismatched prioritization without any without any clear discussion first on what policy you should accept first, ladies and gentlemen. These are the things that contribute to those kind of active criminal intention to begin with, because you are not careful with what you're doing. You are not realizing what is the cost of your course of action that is being done by the government to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. But let's talk about steps of active criminal, like what Sakar told you in her previous speech. We say that all those kind of steps active criminal still exist within government side of the house. Why? Because understand that most of the country that fail in dealing with those kind of pandemics is the result is because when they already see such amount of number, they still do not care about those kind of things. They still think that the power of economy, the survival of the fittest, will still is the most important thing to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. Where we do not think under that side of the house they could champion any those kind of economic benefits, because in both sides of the house economic benefits will disperse either way. But what difference is, under our side of the house, you're going to be easily recovered on those kind of things, because now the damage of pandemic is not that severe, it's not that widespread within your nation. Under that side of the house, people are dying, you need to deal with that first, but you are also going to face the recession of the economy. That's a double burden that they haven't proved in this debate, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, on the first class, what do I have proven to you? I've proven to you that all those kind of this kind of pandemic to begin with are the result of active ill intention towards the government, and it is within the parameter of crimes against humanity, because it's done by systematic action, ladies and gentlemen. of the government and is widespread across the nation. I've also proven to you that the external factors that exist in the status quo is also controllable by government. But let's talk about the second thing and the most important thing. How do you create a better pandemic management, right? We believe that status quo, better pandemic management doesn't exist. Is the cause is because there's a lack of impactful consequences if government failures and German. We say that this is very important to begin with. Why? Because government have the highest standing power and have the highest standing power and have the whole ability to contain this kind of pandemic to begin with, especially in the case of pandemic, ladies and gentlemen. Because understand, if you are a leader, or whether you are a leader or not, whether you are a leader or not, your human instincts to force you to survive will also steps in when the moment of pandemic itself, in order for you to save yourself, in order for you to save your political party to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. This is the reason why there's a lot of bad policy that's existing in the South. There's a lot of example case in the United States of America where health and basic welfare access as a package from government is only accessible towards white people. Those African American does not have those kind of benefits because of this kind of political agenda to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. This would happen when the moment there is no severe charge against all this kind of government to begin with. But it's not going to be existent under our set of those, and this is the important comparative, because under our set of the house, government because under our set of the house, government will feel that the benefit of them receiving a short-term amount of happiness within pandemic could cost them 30 years in prison after you are being charged crimes against humanity. This is the matrix that's important for you when the moment you want to prevent a certain action, when you want to create a deterrence. In order for you to create a deterrence, you need to show to them that the cost of doing a certain crime is bigger than the benefit. That this is what we you all because being locked up those kind of people to the ground. If government cares about political alignment, they will also do their best in doing those kind of pandemic to begin with, because they want to
Hello?
re-elected, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that this is not the case. They will still get the popularity anyway. They will still get the popularity, and for example,
Hello?
the case of America, hello.
Well, you're being constantly and intermittently cut, and I had a hard time understanding your speech, and I'm assuming others did too. I've stopped the timer at...
Me too.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I feel that I have the same problem.
I stopped the timer at 7 minutes. Could you perhaps continue your speech from the point where you explained that having to serve 30 years in prison is going to work as a deterrence?
Am I audible right now?
If possible, you might be better if you could reconnect, because I think
I would also recommend, if you turn off your video, the connectivity will get better.
Yeah.
Okay. Am I audible right now?
Yeah, that's much better. Can other adjudicators hear him as well?
Yes, it's better now.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool. So,
it's better.
okay,
you have like say a sentence or something that will help actually.
Yep. Can you do a mic test?
Test. Am I here right now?
Yep, that's much better. So you have a minute left. The timer starts again at 7 minutes. So keep that in mind, and please restart your speech whenever you're ready.
Okay. I'm going to restart now. So let's move on to the point of how do you create deterrence, because deterrence can only be created after you make all those kind of perpetrators realize that the benefit that they gain after from a certain amount of crime is less comparatively to the cost. And this is what exists under our side of the house, because under our side of the house, the benefit that because the cost that you will gain is being present in 30 years or for even the whole life. But at the end of the day, you are not going to get that short-term benefit, and it's meaningless at the end of the day. But what did they told you is government do not care about if government care about political alignment, they will do good in pandemic handling. We say that polarization exists in the current status quo. It means that doesn't matter what you will do, you will still gain popularity anyway, because the chance of you of not getting to prison, the chance for you to get re-elected will still exist either way under their side of the house, ladies and gentlemen. That's the reason why government would not even care about about doing those kind of good, because they know they by saying this is a mess up or whatsoever. But last thing they told us is political instability, because we say that political instability sometimes is good, because at the end of the day you have more reasons to criticize your government, you have more push and power to leverage your government. But shift of focus are not going to happen at the end of the day, because at least it is going to be focused on certain pandemic. That's the reason why better pandemic management happened to our side of the house. Very proud to propose.
Cool. Thank you for that speech. I want to now invite the second negative speaker to continue with the negative case within 8 minutes. Here.
Am I audible?
Yep.
I'm trying to speak like for like 20 seconds like this. If my voice is cutting, I'm going to find other ways. Is when I speak like this, is there any part of my speech that is cutting?
No problem.
Okay, really good. Two things in my speech. First, on principle of what should be considered as crimes against humanity. Second, on pandemic management. So first, let's compare the parameter of what should be considered as the crimes against humanity. Which side is more legitimate, affirmative or negative? Because affirmative try to bring two arguments. First, it should be widespread because millions of people dying. Sure, we regret this tragedy, but just because there is some widespread damage due to a phenomenon that happened in a state does not mean that it is should be considered as crimes against humanity, exactly because there's externality. For example, the next 2008 economic crisis, because there is a housing bubble that the government cannot predict, because information asymmetry is in the hand of the financial.
Hello.
Okay.
Your audio is a bit.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to start.
Can you retest your mic?
I'm going to start connecting through my phone.
Okay, please do so.
Mada. Where is the link? Can you hear my voice now?
It's howling.
How about now?
Yep, that's much better. And
Okay.
since you were cut off at a very early stage of your speech, you can now restart your speech from the very beginning.
Okay. If there is any problem, please stop me again.
Yep. Absolutely.
I'm going to talk about two things. First, on principle. Second, on how pandemic management better in our side of the house. Firstly, let's compare which parameter of what should be considered as the crimes against humanity is more legitimate, affirmative or negative. Because affirmative brings two principles. First, it should be widespread. Second, it should be systemic. So first, on widespread. They said because millions of people dying due to COVID-19, we should make government liable for crimes against humanity. We regret this tragedy, but just because there is some widespread damage due to a phenomenon happen in a state does not mean that suddenly we can categorize this as crimes against humanity, exactly because there is an idea of externality. For example, 3 things. First, 2008 economic crisis, because there is a housing bubble that government cannot predict because there is an information asymmetry in the hand of financial institution. Second, natural disaster such as earthquakes or tsunami, which has a lot of casualties, which has a lot of widespread damage, but because there is externality that the government cannot control, which is a natural phenomenon in and of itself. Thirdly, terrorist attack, which kills a lot of people due to suicide bombing. The one that initiate these terrorism is terrorist organization. Sure, government cannot predict it. Government cannot capture these terrorists exactly because terrorists have a lot of ways to infiltrate into society. This is parallel towards COVID-19 and pandemic, because government do not have any information in the very first place, because this is an unprecedented virus, because it is different with SARS, MERS, or Ebola, because the transmission is more easy and contraction of this virus are more rampant. Sure, government already have a lot of mechanism of creating safety net, creating emergency measure, creating health protocol, but because this is unprecedented virus, government cannot do it. Therefore, just because it is widespread, it's not always crimes against humanity. Second, on systemic, we told you that negligence, if they want to run this argument on negligence should not be used as a parameter of you try to prosecute government for crimes against humanity, because the crimes against humanity always have to be orchestrated or planned in a comprehensive way by a political actor. This is why when we talk about Rwanda genocide between Hutu towards Tutsi, there are 4 steps. Microaggression that leads into labeling of this Tutsi as cockroach, and after that there is capturing of these Tutsi individuals, and after that there is killing. These are stages. But when you talk about coronavirus and how government does not want to kill people because people are their own constituents, but they responded towards this by saying that we need to put a cost towards these political actors and government. We need to send them to prison for 30 years jail. We told you that it's not necessary because government has already a lot of costs in status quo right now to do their best in handling management of this pandemic. 3 reasons. A, there is an interest of government to remain voted in the next election, because if they fuck up in this coronavirus pandemic, it's going to be a critical hit because there is contestation among political party. And second, there is an interest of political party to have a political legacy, even if there are some seats, some seats in parliament that the representative have the next election possible to run again. We think political party will stop them to do anything reckless because political party have stakes on these particular politicians. But even if, when we talk about individuals that are evil, such as politicians like Donald Trump has his own business interests. If there are more COVID-19 contraction in society, it means society are going to be sick and not productive, which means he's going to lose workers. It means society have less disposable income, and Donald Trump is going to lose a lot of consumer bases, and because of this, his business is going to be also jeopardized. Therefore, what Donald Trump right now doing is not because he is evil in terms of COVID-19, but because he's just not able and not capable in handling this. Rather, we told you that these externalities exist that affect Donald Trump's decision. We told you a lot of things. For example, population number and government's political system, like Vietnam and Thailand, which is their best case scenario, happen because government are more autocratic and they have less population. But even when we talk about Vietnam and Thailand, they have second wave COVID-19. It means doesn't matter government do the best, there is still always second wave because it's unprecedented. In the past, they said that it's transmitted through water. Now they said it's transmitted into air, which are always developed because virus always can evolve. And we told you that society's belief and interest that make the government cannot handle this. They said that government could have captured and put more force to these individuals. Sure, but it's still they still exceeding their externality as government, because when you put capture onto the individuals that do not want to wear masks, they are protected by constitution to have freedom of rights. Therefore, government is going to violate the constitution, which is created by the previous government in terms of the constitution. And if you put more force to society, they're going to retaliate more. There are more anti-lockdown protests in US right now because government tried to create some measure. Therefore, government is not that easy. And if we talk about borders, currently government already put a lot of border control. But even to some extent, economic and safety net against COVID-19 still need to be balanced. This is the reason when we talk about government cannot always put border, because there are some economic consideration, there are some trading, mobilization of individuals that are still important, especially when we talk about developing countries that cannot rely solely on their own economy. They need to have trade from other countries. Therefore, it shows to you that there is no active intention and systemic violation. I'm going to explain to you on pandemic management. There are 5 reasons why they make things worse. The first reason is because there is going to be a labeling against government, that government is not going to be a credible actor. Why this is bad? Because it will lessen the legitimacy of the government. Because a lot of the measures against COVID-19, such as social distancing, such as wearing masks, such as checking yourself to the doctor, requires government to say it, and society understand that government is acting within their best interest. If you say government is bad, society is going to revolt to the street, create more demonstration, and contraction for COVID-19 is going to increase and create more damage to the society. Second reason is because there is going to be vacuum of power. As they say, there's going to be prosecution, investigation in Den Haag, Netherlands. It means that government politicians are going to be removed from their power, and their replacement is going to create new policy which are not always objectively good. Probably this new government is going to create different policy just to make themselves distinct from the previous politician, not for the objective good of society. That means the handling is going to be bad, worse. Third reason is because the transition to a new government is going to be worse, because when you have this transition, it means that there is going to be campaign with you attack each other, and you need to differentiate yourself against your political opponent. This is why there is Bernie shows for Medicare for all, Biden wants to have Obamacare, and Trump will have more universal private system. They will have less bipartisanship, and there is always political deadlock that will create less solution to this creation of solution. Fourthly, there is going to be distrust against ICC, because ICC now already have the distrust. They are being perceived as too elitist. They only prosecute African leaders. When you have this, it means there's going to be less trust, which is going to be bad for the creation of international vaccines, international solutions, collaboration between scientists, which is going to create vaccine, and it's not going to happen when there is always countries distrusting. And last reason why this is bad is because some countries are going to pull out from ICC and pull out from Rome Statute, which will hamper their ability to prosecute future war crimes, prosecute, collecting evidence, putting witnesses, or cooperating with ICC to capture some political war crimes. That is bad for humanity. It's bad for ICC, bad for everyone. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for that speech. Now I'd like to invite the third affirmative speaker to conclude the affirmative substantive speeches within 8 minutes. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep, clear.
Okay, cool. Judges, I need you to take a look at your paper closely and ask yourself, right? What is the comprehensive mechanism that opposition brings you to the table in this debate? I see there's none, right? Because even if there are a lot of external factors that society is that hard-headed on their side of the house, I don't see how that will change without any reform or without any pressure coming from international criminal court, for example, in order for them to have a better management in the end of the day, right? Because it's as if they want to give up and they want to surrender towards all the external factors of the government, and it's not the fault of the government. That is all about their case. Then I don't see any outcome or better improvement under their side of the house, right? But let's talk about exactly, because it's unprecedented, terrorist attacks, financial market crash, natural phenomenon, as well as COVID-19, for example. They're all unprecedented. No one can predict when will it happen. But how do we respond it, and what policies that can we conduct in order to respond and to save our society, in order to in order to improve from the current condition is exactly in the power of the government, right? Which is exactly the cardinal sin that they have done to you in this debate, is because they haven't responded to you on how that government is the ultimate actor that has the authority in order for them to enact certain policies and regulations in order to respond to unprecedented consequences of all these events to begin with, right? This is something that they have to answer, and they have yet to answer. I don't think it will be something that's relevant anyway. But second, two things I'm going to talk about in my speech, right? That why government is the most accountable actor, and second, about the outcome, why better reform only exists under our side, why we save more people from the pandemic at the end of the day, right? Let's go to the first point, why government is the most accountable actor. The opposition told you that they do not have ill intention, and therefore they cannot be prosecuted at the very first place. But firstly, Adit has told you that politicization is exactly the ill intention of people, on how Jair Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, goes on live TV and tells his people that mask is not important, for example, on how Donald Trump goes on live TV also and tells his people that the coronavirus is something that's a conspiracy coming from China to begin with, right? This is kind of politicization. The moment politicians and leaders among states insert the ideology, persistence, for example, on how did they insert the interest of certain business groups, like what opposition has acknowledged on how Donald Trump has business interests, for example, are all in ill intention, because they have the interest in order to maintain power and populist rhetorics to begin with, right? And they say that government has the natural intention in order to bring betterment towards this kind of pandemic. We say no, right? Because firstly, I think they have to characterize the voters in itself. Are they that really smart and meritable to begin with? We say that there's no such thing, because even if the Donald Trump fails in handling the pandemic, all the Republicans are still going to support him, because people are polarized. That ideology is entrenched in their heart and mind, and therefore the people are still going to choose him regardless of his failure or success in COVID-19, for example, right? But secondly, I think that we are talking about politicians that are inherently like persistent and reckless, like Jair Bolsonaro, Donald Trump, and our Joko Widodo in Indonesia, for example, that has multiple business interests that want to please a certain people or certain business groups to begin with, right? We say that this kind of characterization needs to be engaged by opposition. Why government like this doesn't exist? But we say that it's so clear in our reality right now, that on how these kind of leaders exist in our live TV and constantly brainwash people to not believe in Corona, for example, and to not wear masks because it's not something that's safe. Because people are not that smart, people are not that meritable, for example. We say that these kind of things are failed to fly in their side of the house, right? But secondly, let's talk about sub-point B about externalities, because this is something that they have championed to you all in their speeches to begin with, right? We said that firstly, they told you about unwillingness of people. We said that unwillingness of people is in the control, should be in the control of the government, right? Because unwillingness of people derives from untrustworthy to the government, for example. I do not follow my government because I do not trust his policies, for example, because I know that there are a lot of politicization going on there, for example, because there's a lack of a transparency of data, for example, that comes from Indonesian government, and therefore I do not trust my government, and that's why I cannot follow the instruction coming from the Indonesian government, and etc. Right? This is to say, unwillingness of people happens because government do not educate and communicate well enough towards its citizens, about the policies at the very first place. This is the characterization and structural research that exists exclusively under a government side. You cannot count opposition on this to begin with, right? But secondly, they talk about lack of resources and preparation. Let's ask yourself, what do you need to handle a pandemic? We said that in the case of COVID-19, for example, we need a strict lockdown policy, right? This is exactly because COVID-19 is so unprecedented. Global economic turmoil exists on both sides of the house, on every country to begin with, right? This is to say that sacrifices in order for you to have lockdown and to sacrifice on your economy is a risk needs to be taken by all countries in the world, right? Why so? Because the moment you let loose a strict lockdown policy, for example, example, there will be a lot of contagion and there will be a worsened economic recession in the longer term, for example. But this is something that's not being taken by some of the government that fails, right? Because Indonesia wants to appeal to business interests and wants to give investment, for example, wants to attract investment, for example, and they lie to people that this is something that's okay. You can come to my country because it's safe and it's not something that's severe. But let's take a look at the reality of Indonesia right now on why that we have economic so low, because this is something that government has lied to people and to its investor. This is the kind of the accountability that we need from the government, because all the actions they have done towards its politicization and the fulfills of business interests, right? This is to say that externalities always exist on both sides, right? But what you need to counter is the implication of these externalities. We say that these implication and responses are the ones that are in the hands of the government to begin with, right? This is to say that all of this kind of argument about externalities don't matter anyway, right? Because they keep telling you about the parallel example of terrorist attacks. We said that's not relevant. So I think that I have proven to you that government is the most accountable actor. Secondly, about outcome, because they tell you that people are going to create instability and whatnot. This is where their biggest mistake comes, right? Because they never mention to you on how better reforms under their side of the house can happen. We said, why hold on to shitty government when every second of their reign is causing people's lives by second, right? We said that this is something that's exclusively beneficial under our side. That we welcome technocracy, for example. We welcome experts to lead the management of our pandemic, but not the government who politicizes everything and who lie to its people, right? This is the counter characterization they need to tell you in their speeches, right? On how that reform can exist when people are so hard-headed and politicians do not have clear characterization that on their side of the house, right? We say that instability will happen, but we say that it's something, a trade-off that we will take if it's an exchange for more accountable and more able leaders that can lead our country to better management to survive in the pandemic. This is to say that, and let's talk about the third one, about the distrust to ICC. This is a very under elaborated, but I'm going to engage it anyway, because first it's very irrelevant that now this is going to fulfill the interest of ICC, for example, on how that this is something that's going to make people distrust ICC. We said it's not something that's going to happen because ICC is the one that is neutral, for example, under UN. I don't see that how that's relevant and how this is the interest and the most prioritized issue when we handle pandemic. This is to say that firstly, opposition needs to engage to you. How do they create better reform at the very first place? And secondly, why are they not accountable when they are lying, literally lying to their people? We are very proud to propose.
Thank you for that speech. Now I'd like to invite the third negative speaker to conclude the substantive part of this debate. Yeah.
Test, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Wait, I'm gonna set up my timer. Just one clarification before I proceed to my substantive, right? So basically what they're trying to impose to us is that the characterization that we should play upon is that evil government, such as like Bolsonaro government, who are actively telling people not to wear masks and whatnot. I don't think that this is an extreme scenario that should be debated upon. Because if it's really the case that they are this extreme, number one, that their proposal to have deterrence effect won't eventually be working at all, because Bolsonaro doesn't care about society criticisms. So having this deterrence of people to like lose out your image and whatnot doesn't necessarily change the person. So nothing changes on their side. So, but second of all, even when the characterization is this extreme, it means that Bolsonaro doesn't want to cooperate with ICC at all. They could eventually shut down the access of international aid and help, because that's feasible, right? Look at what dictator in Africa did. They're running away. They're trying to not be prosecuted and whatnot, and their cronies are still in power, but so the country, even if that you are not in the office, you still have the control over the government. So nothing changes on the side house. So what is the conclusion? The conclusion is you cannot play in the characterization that says that Bolsonaro is irrational, because irrespective in both side house, this irrationality cannot be cured. So we have to play in a scenario where Bolsonaro is not that irrational and Trump is could be rationalized at the end of the day. But I'm going to engage anyway, right? Why then that even if Bolsonaro is irrational, that they can change on our side house and status quo mechanism is enough? Because Bolsonaro irrationality, maybe Bolsonaro is irrational, but he still cares about money. That's exactly why the incentive structure in status quo, such as losing sponsorship, political donor and whatnot, because business is not running when COVID-19 is still on the air, it means that there's a pretty much incentive for Jair Bolsonaro to do good anyway, because they wanted to pertain the power and money got by this company and whatnot, right? So this is an incentive whatsoever. So even if in a characterization where they are that evil, we said that it's particularly correct on our side house. I don't think that why then the affirmative team never explained why then that's not enough. That's on them, right? So two things, my speech. One, I'm going to talk about does this failure falls into the category of crimes against humanity. Second of all, I'm going to talk about the pandemic management and our comparative, why then it's better, right? So first, let's talk about the principle, right? Does this failure falls into the category of crimes against humanity? So we brought three things to the table. Firstly, we brought the idea of externalities. Therefore, there is an incapacity for the government. Hence, there is something that is unfair. Second, we say that it needs a criminal intent, which is not fulfilled by the government. Lastly, we say that this should be premeditated, which is not the case in status quo. So first, let's talk about externalities. What is the response towards externalities? They say that this is something controllable because you could have like forced regulation, like Italy and France. Therefore, if you don't choose to do this, the externalities is meaningless on their side house. Why then this response is not enough, right? Two reasons. Firstly, is that the idea of having different demography. The examples that they brought about Italy and France having this political force towards the citizens is feasible because the political condition of that country is stable, because they agree upon that COVID-19 is something that is bad. Therefore, there is a bipartisanship over the issue. Therefore, it's feasible to force people not to go outside and to wear masks all the time, right? The differences between countries like Indonesia or other countries like US and whatnot, they have a severe political polarization that could cause that forcing them to do something that they don't want to could cause like what Second Negative said. The protests in US happening, the protests in Indonesia happening because there's a distrust. Therefore, the harm of that action consequentially harmful rather than not doing any force, because doing this protest of not wearing masks have a higher chances of spreading the virus. Therefore, we say externalities is not something controllable. They need to provide, and the parallel example that they provide is the same case, and every single country should comply on that. But the second reason why this is not enough is that we pose it to you that if we're talking about international like borders and whatnot, like what Indonesia did, trying to have this tourism or trying to not to block China from the from the border and whatnot, we say that this is something that cannot be done because there is a trade agreement that they don't want to eventually abolish. What does it mean then? It means that in January and February 2020, when it comes to countries not blocking China out of the the flight schedules and whatnot, most probably they cannot do that because there is a power asymmetry and dependency over trade agreement that China controls over this ally. That's exactly why the absence of this trade also harms the society, which government doesn't want to do that. So there is a dilemmatic position when the government cannot have this. Therefore, externalities argument makes sense. But even if let's just say that they're capable, we said that like the unpredictability of the virus still exists, such as reactivation of virus in South Korea and whatnot, makes it harder for government to do so. So the capacity of the government and externality still stands because they never engage why then the virus is controllable, why then this parameter that we provide to you is something that is invalid. They're just dismissing it constantly. But second of all, we've posed to you that it needs criminal intent. Why then this is the parameter? Because if you take a look of crimes against humanity in the past, there is a benefit for them to do these crimes against humanity. Case in point, Holocaust. There is a benefit for Nazi to do the killings of Jews, to have race superiority and have a political benefit for them to be able to reign in Germany. Comparatively, in coronavirus cases, I don't think government have a benefit from killing the citizens. Why? Three reasons. First, we're talking about no voting blocks. We're talking about we're talking about no workforce left. We're talking about how then no purchasing power and economic circulation of the citizen is dying, right? So we say that the idea of criminal intent doesn't necessarily exist on our side house because government cannot benefit from this. So basically, it proves that negligence cannot be the parameter, because if we're talking about negligence, in a lot of cases of crimes against humanity, German citizens is negligence upon the action of Nazi, but they are never labeled as the one who do the crime of humanity because they are the bystanders. So this is not a normal criminalization. This is a crimes against humanity. But lastly, we said that this is premeditated. That's exactly why we say that stages of this happens doesn't occur in status quo, but no response whatsoever coming from the affirmative side. Why then this argumentation is really important? Two reasons. Because firstly, in every occasion possible, we label things such as like which have a widespread effect, such as countries with high poverty line or countries which face economic crisis, but we never label them as crimes against humanity because there are some certain circumstances that justify the inability of a government to act in that way. But second reason this is important, it's because that irrespective of the outcome, we say that this is something that stands alone, independent of the practical benefit. So the framing from third affirmative saying that there's no comparative on our side of the house cannot fly, because irrespective of that, we said that this principal argument stands, and we said this is something that is unjust to begin with. But second of all, let's engage with the practical, right? Why then pandemic management is better on our side of the house? The only argumentation that comes from them is that talking about deterrence. Why then this is unlikely to happen? First, we say that if that's extreme scenario, they won't change. They don't care about society criticisms and whatnot. But second of all, I think that if they really wanted to, like, if you are being hostile to these leaders, they would most probably be defensive. In what point that they're being defensive? They're being defensive in blocking out criticisms, like blocking internet and whatnot. They're trying to only benefit their constituent who are willing to support them. They're willing to spread propaganda. So the fight focuses on the defense between these crimes, the labeling the crimes against humanity, instead of solving the issue. So I don't think that deterrence will eventually affect on anything that is meaningful. Case in point, dictatorship that being labeled as crimes of humanity, they're trying to delay the process. But even if, at best scenario, let's just say that they have reparation, they have things like money given, why then this benefit is not ideal, right? Because understand in pandemic, having liquidified money is not necessarily important, because what these people need is that a long-term and sustainable help. What? Empowerment of community in terms of how then they have mentality to struggle, to mentality preparedness to struggle through COVID-19. Second, hotline when they're having problems. Thirdly, the ability for them to adjust and get help and community empowerment to have collaboration and cooperation. This is exactly why the argumentation of political instability really important, because on our side of the house, the incentive is mutually exclusive, but then what's different is we have the way to be, it is visible, it's more visible on our side of the house. It's very proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. On to the reply portion of this debate. I'd like to first invite the negative reply speaker to conclude the negative side of this debate. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Two questions. What is crimes against humanity? Second, how do we stop the COVID-19 contagion better in both sides of the house? So how to solve the problem of COVID-19? Their argument are so easy to say that every single externality are within the government control. We already from the first speaker told you that no, these externalities are not just mere externalities. It is something that government cannot predict because it is unprecedented, because it is not a regular disease. It is an ever-evolving COVID-19 that yesterday they were contagious through water, now they are contagious through air. It is showing that even if Vietnam, that have like strict government control, have its own second wave contagion, no matter what government is doing. And more than that, we also already said that even if government can force this on society, like forcing lockdown or jailing people that roam free in the COVID-19 pandemic. The problem is the government cannot do this because it will violate the rights of the people, violates the constitution, and people are provoked to protest against government, therefore prolonging the COVID-19 contagion. No response, especially when the third and the second and third speaker, we told you that these possibility exists because there is conspiracy theories and people that have subconscious distrust against government due to political politicization in US and Indonesia to distrust the incumbent politicians. Therefore, it is not within the government control. But even if externalities argument still be bought by the government, by the adjudicator, it still makes sense, it is still not correlating to the active criminal intent, which we told you from the very first case, that it is only a mere negligence, which is not categorized as crimes against humanity. It is different with Rwanda and Holocaust, which have premeditated plan from the government. It is not a premeditated plan, it's just a mere negligence. This principal argument stands alone regardless of the consequences. Second, pandemic management. Their argument only talks about one thing and one thing only, which is creating costs towards the government. So they are going to change. We told you that cost is an exclusive for three reasons. There is election, they want to be voted in the next cycle. Second, there is political party legacy and competition in which they are going to contest towards which one that have better political policy. Third, there is business interest from the politicians to stop COVID-19 as soon as possible, because otherwise they will have less workers that getting sick. There is no buyers because society cannot go to work and there is no disposable income to buy their products, and there is devaluation of assets. No response to this business interest / politician interest. But the third speaker, they come with new idea, which is how about an authoritarian leader that is so stubborn and cannot be changed? People like Bolsonaro. We told you that this is not the debate because you cannot put costs on government that are still going to run regardless of what election cycle that they have, because government is able to manipulate the voters, stuffing up the ballot boxes. Second, we told you that if we talk about authoritarian leader, these authoritarian leaders are more likely to pull out from ICC before they are prosecuted, which makes you unable to prosecute and have this cost in the very first place. What is the comparative in our side of the house? At least in our side of the house, we don't have vacuum of power. There is no need for the politicians to differentiate themselves in terms of their policy making inside of the campaign to show which one is better. There is more bipartisanship, there is less deadlock, which is going to create common solution towards the solution of COVID-19 in and of itself. And second, at least when we talk about authoritarian leader, they will not distrust ICC that much. So there is still vaccines collaboration. Scientists are still allowed to go to WHO so they can sample the Brazilian COVID-19 that is specific to this particular region that will solve the COVID-19 in and of itself. On their side of the house, ICC is going to be distrusted. The only response coming from the third speaker is only, hey, look, ICC is still always a neutral actor. No, we told you in the second speaker, ICC is already being perceived as serving white people interest and only prosecuting African leaders. This narrative is going to be accentuated, which makes you prolong this COVID-19 contagion. Very proud to oppose.
Thank you so much for that speech. Finally, I'd like to invite the affirmative reply speaker to conclude the entirety of this debate within 4 minutes. Here.
This is clear.
Could you try speaking once more?
This is clear.
Yep.
Okay. Trust me, my reply speech is very important. The reason why the negative team should lose, because they only rebutting example without giving any structural reason, ladies and gentlemen. For example, on how they rebutting the example of Bolsonaro without giving any structural reason at all. In comparatively better under affirmative side of the house, because we giving you a lot of the structural reasons why in the principle of the government is obligation and the responsibility of the principle of the government from begin with, ladies and gentlemen. gentlemen. For example, on how they have a lot of facilities in order facilities and regulation in order to facilitate them to mitigate the harms from begin with. We told you about the very structural reason from begin with, and they only rebut some examples. This is why the whole of the negative team should lose two things: external factors and impact. So going to the external factors, they address you 3 points. Number 1 about natural disaster and terrorists. Number 2 about society behavior, and number 3 about the country condition. All of these points are very funny, ladies and gentlemen. First, they're talking about natural disaster. We told you that natural disaster is very unpredictable at all. But Corona is completely predictable, because the moment it exists in China, every government has already have a lot of information and already have attention that there is a potential that it could come to our country, ladies and gentlemen. It shows to you that the potential of the pandemic is really predictable in compared with natural disaster and terrorists. We don't think that all of the parallel example is relevant. Second of all, they're talking about the external factor about the society behavior and so on and so forth. People don't want to use masks and so on and so forth. Yes, exactly, because this kind of the society behavior, exactly this is the failure of the governments to control the society behavior, because government also have obligation to control the society behavior. For example, they have the facility, for example, like regulation and so on and so forth, which is the purpose of to shape the society behavior from begin with. So that is why, because this kind of the society behavior, so that is why it is absolutely the failure of the governments. Lastly, they're talking to you about the country conditions. This is how they only rebutting example, because they talking to you about the Vietnam is less population, as authoritarian and so on and so forth. Singapore also has less population, but Singapore is not as effective as Vietnam, ladies and gentlemen. Scandinavia is also democratic as not authoritarian, but they also effective to handle the corona. We've taught you about a lot of the structural reasons, and they only rebutting the example of Vietnam. We don't think all of the rebuttal can come and you can count it at all, ladies and gentlemen. But then they add about, there is the intention, there is no evil intention at all from the government. We've told to you there is the intention of the governments. The moment Jokowi delay the handling of the corona, but they know the impact of the corona from begin with, only for to maintain their image. It is the intention of Jokowi to let this happen, ladies and gentlemen. For example, Donald Trump, the intention to only maintain their economy and businesses. It shows the intention, evil intention is there is, ladies and gentlemen. And lastly, they're talking about impact. They only rebutting Bolsonaro, but we have noticed that there is a lot of democratic governments, and this rebuttal is only contingent that this kind of government is don't care to the people, ladies and gentlemen. And they're talking about the political instability. There will be worsened condition. We said no, because all of the government will know that this is the issue that all of the society concerned of. So that is why they will erase the political instability, political interest to solve this kind of the pandemic, because we've told you there are politicians that want good image and notice on how this is the issue that concerned by the society. They will fix it better under our side of the house. And lastly, they're talking about ICC. We've told you, they're talking about ICC is not credible and so on and so forth, white supremacy and so on and so forth. We've told you there is a lot of criticisms, and that is why ICC at the very beginning by the president is also neutral, and that is why all of the case of negative teams is unreasonable and cannot be counted. Very proud to be photo affirmative.
Thank you for that speech. The round is over.